This is Pinar, and you're listening to the Pinar English Podcast. Today we're talking about the airport, checking in, security, and boarding a plane.
Hello everyone, this is Pinar, and you're listening to the Pinar English Podcast. I'm really happy you decided to spend a few minutes with me today. Listening to English regularly is one of the best ways to improve. The more you listen, the more familiar the language becomes. Today, we continue our daily life series with another very common situation. Today, we are talking about going to the airport, checking in for a flight, going through security, and boarding an airplane.
Hello, here is my boarding pass. I am ready to board the plane. Thank you, have a good day.
These are situations many travelers experience, so learning these expressions can be very useful. Now let me tell you about my experience at the airport.
I love this view. Flying above the clouds never gets old. Everything looks so peaceful from up here.
Last month, I had to travel to another city for a short trip. I decided to take a plane because it was the fastest option. My flight was scheduled for the evening, so I arrived at the airport about 2 hours early. Airports can be very busy, and arriving early helps avoid stress. When I entered the airport, I immediately looked at the departure board to confirm my flight number and check-in counter. The departure board showed my flight and the counter number, so I walked to the airline desk. There was already a small line of passengers waiting. Waiting in line simply means waiting for your turn. After a few minutes, it was my turn. The airline employee smiled and said, "Good afternoon. May I see your passport?" I gave her my passport and she began typing on her computer. Then she asked, "Do you have any luggage to check in?" Checked luggage means bags that travel in the airplane's cargo area. I had one suitcase, so I said, "Yes, just one suitcase." She placed my suitcase on the scale to check the weight. Fortunately, it was within the allowed limit. Then she printed my boarding pass and said, "Your seat is 14A and your boarding gate is B12. She also added, "Boarding will begin at 6:30 p.m. A boarding gate is the place where passengers wait before entering the airplane. After finishing the check-in process, I walked toward the security check area. Security is an important part of air travel. Every passenger must pass through security before entering the departure area. The security officer said, "Please, place your bags on the conveyor belt." I placed my backpack and phone in a tray and walked through the metal detector. Luckily, everything was fine and I passed through quickly. After security, the airport suddenly felt much calmer. There were many shops, restaurants, and cafes around the waiting area. Since I still had some time before boarding, I decided to buy a coffee. I sat near the large airport windows and watched airplanes taking off and landing. Watching airplanes is always fascinating. After about 20 minutes, I heard an announcement on the loudspeaker. "Attention passengers, boarding for flight 308 is now starting." People immediately began walking toward the gate. At the gate, passengers formed another line. When it was my turn, the airline staff scanned my boarding pass and said, "Have a nice flight." Then I walked through the boarding bridge and entered the airplane. Inside the plane, a flight attendant welcomed passengers and helped them find their seats. I had a window seat, which is my favourite seat because I enjoy looking at the view during takeoff. I placed my bag in the overhead compartment and sat down. Soon, the flight attendant made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts." A seatbelt keeps passengers safe during takeoff and landing. A few minutes later, the airplane began moving slowly toward the runway. Then suddenly the engines became louder and the plane started accelerating. Within seconds, we were in the air. Looking out of the window, I could see the city lights becoming smaller and smaller. The flight was very comfortable, and there was almost no turbulence. When a flight has no turbulence, we often say, "It was a smooth flight." After about an hour, the plane began descending toward our destination. When we landed safely, everyone started collecting their bags and preparing to leave the airplane. Traveling by plane can sometimes feel stressful, but it is also exciting. It means you are going somewhere new. Now, let's review some useful expressions related to air travel. Catch a flight. This means to take a flight. I need to catch a flight tomorrow morning. Miss a flight. This means arriving too late and not being able to board the plane. She missed her flight because of traffic. Smooth flight. A flight without turbulence. We had a very smooth flight today. Jet lag. Feeling tired.